So why do we need to set boundaries? Why do we even need to think about politics? Why can't we just let it run its course? What are the dangers or the effects of unbounded political discussions in the workplace? Well, recent studies have shown there's been a loss of productivity. There's been anger issues. In fact, 45% of workers said they actually have witnessed a political dialogue move to a conflict in the workplace. In fact, if you look at it, 1 in 5 employees admits in the last 5 years they have left a job because of a toxic workplace culture. 1 in 5. So you've got to have boundaries. You've got to communicate them, and you've got to create the environment where you're not forbidding that speech, but you give them a forum to express their own personal views that doesn't come across in the entire workplace. Google, I wrote down Google's statement. And it was really interesting because they've been struggling with this. Google has obviously a lot of opinionated people, as many organizations do, and they were struggling with this. How much do we allow it? How much do we limit it when you're setting policy? So their policy, again, not for everybody, but just as a data point, they said, while sharing information and ideas with colleagues helps build community, disrupting the workday to have a raging debate over politics or the latest news story does not. Our primary responsibility is to do the work we've each been hired to do, not to spend working time on debates about non-work topics. So that's their policy. Now, is that good for you? Is it not? Again, this is just one example, but they saw it enough disruption that they felt they had to come out with a policy on that to say, hey, you know what? We're hired to do a job. Let's do the job. The other interesting one recently that we've seen at several companies are that they fall under the hostile work environment or the bullying legal precedents. People feel discriminated against because 9 out of 10 people in a company feel a particular way and they don't feel a particular way about a candidate, about a political issue, and they feel like it's a hostile work environment because they're singled out for their beliefs. Maybe not even deliberately, but 9 people are talking about this particular issue and they all agree, and this one person feels marginalized. That's not okay. They have a claim there that you've brought a hostile work environment and they feel discriminated against. So we've got to have some guidelines. We've got to have some boundaries there, even when you feel the team is mainly homogenous. In fact, perhaps even more so. So what do you do if you get a hostile work environment complaint or a bullying complaint? Do you have a policy? If you don't have a written down policy, guidelines, you're going to have a tough time defending yourself against that. So I highly recommend, don't just have a policy, write it down, communicate it, post it, distribute it, multiple forums. You've got to let folks know what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. You've got to make the difference between what is your opinion versus what crosses that line into harassment or bullying. And it's a fine line. You've got to wrestle with that. And I encourage you to involve your team members, your employees in that wrestling. If it's a diktat from on high, if it's something that's handed down, well, you don't necessarily have their skin in the game. You don't have them engaged in the process. Engage them in coming up with it. What is okay? What is not okay? Trust their intelligence. They're smart. And they also view certain issues very strongly. So get them involved in the process. What I think it comes down to is make sure you've codified in a policy, in a procedure, in a guideline, what you mean when you say respect. Because it really comes down to how are you demonstrating respect for your coworkers? You can disagree without being disagreeable. And when you codify that, when you put it in guidelines, now people have an understanding of what it means to behave in an appropriate way when they differ. Not if they differ, when they differ from their coworkers.